Hey, thanks for joining me on Drive North with Meg Ellefson. Tongue-tied there for a second. I'm really happy to have joining me for the first time on my new podcast, attorney from Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, Dan Lennington. How are you?
I'm doing great. It's great to be back on with you in a different format, but I like podcasts better anyway. So
Me too. Well, good. I'm glad. That's a win-win. Yeah, as I say often when I talk with my guests, I took a hiatus. It was much needed. Got away from, I don't know, the grind, and this is kind of back on my own terms, which I really enjoy, and I can kind of pick and choose my hours and my guests as well. I always was able to do that, but great to have you. Thank you for joining me. This is very timely. Obviously, the United States Supreme Court just came out with a decision about, and it's a 6-3 ruling, that the Voting Rights Act and racial gerrymandering claims as evaluated under the Voting Rights Act. And so if you want to explain the legalese and then, drill it down to us, us non-legal people, and then what the implications are. I read that it is a win for Republicans.
yeah, it's a little tricky to think about this, but the way to think about it is to go back and just talk about the facts. So in 2020, every 10 years there's a census. And populations change and shift, and so states have to redraw their district lines for Congress and all their other lines for state legislature and whatnot. And so this particular case talks about what Louisiana did with their congressional lines. So there's 6 congressional districts in Louisiana. One of those people is Mike Johnson, who's the Speaker of the House, probably the most famous person from Louisiana right now, who's in Congress. But there are 6 congressmen in Louisiana. There's 6 districts, and when the population shifted in 2020, the state legislature had to go back and redraw the lines. And when they redrew the lines, they came out with one district that was majority black and 5 districts that were majority white. And so the black plaintiffs sued under the Voting Rights Act and said, look, the Voting Rights Act basically guarantees proportional representation for blacks. Black voting should not be what they call diluted, or there's schemes where they say we've been cracked or packed, meaning that black neighborhoods have been broken up and spread out, or blacks have been jammed into all one district so that their voting power is diluted. And for decades and decades under the Voting Rights Act, that was a valid claim to say, hey, the state, what you did to us is not fair, because in Louisiana, for example, about 1/3 of the population is black. So 1 district out of 6 is not 1/3. And so the plaintiff says, we need 2 black districts out of 6, because 2 out of 6 is 1/3. And that would be fair. And that would be fair under the Voting Rights Act. And they took that case in 2022, 2023 through the Louisiana federal court system. And the judge agreed with them and said, under current case law, that is true. The state has an obligation to basically make sure that your voting power as black voters is not diluted. And therefore, there needs to be a second district. So Louisiana, you go back and you redraw a new map that has 2 black districts. So the state of Louisiana went through the whole process again, and they drew the lines again, and they explicitly drew in a second black district. That case was litigated up to the Supreme Court because a guy named Philip Calais, who was a white voter, said, hey, wait a minute, I'm white. You drew a district that was going to diminish my voting power, and you drew these lines based purely on race. And I think that's unconstitutional. And the state defended itself, say, hey, the Voting Rights Act, the Voting Rights Act makes us do this. We just have to do this because of the Voting Rights Act. And the Supreme Court today said, no, the Voting Rights Act does not make you do this. The Constitution prohibits all race discrimination. It prohibits race from being a factor in any decision. And the only exception that's relevant here is if a state is going to draw lines to cure some sort of past intentional discrimination. So, for example, if the previous map was found to have been drawn with discriminatory intent, so the legislators all got together and said, we're drawing this because we're intentionally trying to disempower black voters. Then you could redraw the lines to sort of fix that and to use race as a factor there. But it's a very limited circumstance. And that's not what was happening here. What was happening here is that lines were drawn to particularly benefit one race over another. And the Supreme Court says, no, you can't do that. Race can't play a role in redistricting at all. You have to be completely race blind. And if you use race, your map's going to get struck down. Now, what you should be focusing on, and there's a number of factors that a legislature might look into when they're drawing lines. So, for example, in Wisconsin, we had this principle called least changes, which was the idea that whatever we do to our maps, we're going to try to change them as little as possible. So maybe we need to move one town to the east and one town to the west, and then we'll be fine. And the districts will be proportional. Or we want the districts to be contiguous or compact, or we want to preserve incumbents. We don't want to draw a map where all the incumbents are going to lose. Politically, we don't want to have that sort of turnover, every 4 years where maps are just redrawn willy-nilly. And so there's all sorts of these non-racial factors that can go into drawing a map. But the minute you start to use race, that's when it becomes unconstitutional.
So, as I'm listening to you, and I mean, let's just think about a listener or someone who's viewing this conversation, and I mean, I'm still genuinely perplexed by how maps, how anyone can justify drawing maps based on the population's color of their skin. It's so peculiar to me. And so I guess the assumption is, and presumably Democrats are very upset about this ruling, and they aren't happy that it's happened because this is yet another another way for them to I guess cheat in elections in a manner, in a way, because I guess they're making the assumption that if we can, and you can correct me, but as I understand it, the thinking is that if they can have a makeup of a district that is predominantly black, then they can dupe the black voter into voting for them. And I don't say that in a disrespectful way to black people. I'm saying that trying to get inside the heads of Democrats and how they evidently believe that that they have the black vote, and how dare anyone try to change the maps so that it makes it more difficult for them to take advantage of I don't know, a non-white voter, I guess.
Yeah, and what you're saying is exactly true. And I was looking for this one quote here from the opinion. It says, where the state assumes from a group of voters' race that they, quote, think alike, share the same political interests, and will prefer the same candidates at the polls, it engages in racial stereotyping at odds with equal protection mandates. So that's exactly what you're describing, is what we call now racial stereotyping. In the case against Harvard a few years ago about affirmative action, Harvard said we need more black students because, quote, a black student can bring something to the classroom that a white student cannot. And the Supreme Court said that is a horrible racial stereotype. And in the same way here, the entire previous case law was based on this idea that black voters all vote alike, that they all have the same interests, and we have to keep them in their own districts so they can elect their representatives to advocate for their interests. That is exactly what the court is saying here, is that assuming that a group thinks alike, shares the same political interests, and prefers the same candidates is racial stereotyping. And it's just not true. As we've seen in the last election with Trump, Trump's numbers on Hispanic votes, black votes, is a lot different than, say, John McCain or Mitt Romney's votes in those areas. The numbers have shifted, and people of different racial groups are shifting. It's sort of like saying, all women prefer this type of candidate or all men prefer this political party. Well, right now, the Republicans is largely a male-dominated party, and the Democrats is dominated by females. But to say that's always going to be like that in the next election, that is a stereotype against women and men, saying that they all have these values and they all vote in this way. We know from history that changes all the time, and so we shouldn't just assume what one racial group is going to vote like. And as you say, the sort of pernicious belief here is the idea that politicians could take advantage of a race and try to trick them into believing, what did Joe Biden say? If you don't vote for me, you ain't black. He literally said that, like basically challenging their own racial identity to say, if you don't vote for me, you ain't black. And that if you vote for Republicans, they're going to, take away this benefit that we gave to you. That is racial demagoguery, and we know that's happened in the past, and it continues to happen.
I guess what I can't help but think when I, just hearing you talk about it, and then this decision too, is that for Republicans, we really, well, I guess I would like to say that I would like to believe that we campaign on the issues and educating and informing voters so that they can understand what we represent versus what the Democrats do. And it seems as if they're more about making promises, and obviously the identity politics comes into play, and telling voters or groups or blocks of voters that don't worry about what we stand for or what we represent. Just vote for us. Just vote for us because we are the party that represents your skin color. And I just think it's so insulting. And I don't understand how they can even. I'm reading some of the, how they say how the ruling is problematic, some of the reaction from the left, and I just think, gosh, just be honest. And I don't know if they can be.
Yeah, I think that I wouldn't necessarily call it a Republican-Democrat issue. I think it's a conservative and non-conservative viewpoint. So the conservative viewpoint is that we emphasize the individual. The individual has individual rights and duties and responsibilities, and the individual has value because of their individual interests. That we value you as a person who has a particular set of interests, that lives in a particular community, that has runs a business, that has all sorts of interests, that if you were to meet someone, you would talk to them about themselves individually. Family, church, local community, that sort of thing. Strengths and weaknesses. Everybody's different. That's sort of a conservative viewpoint, but people should be treated equally under the law. Now, the opposite viewpoint, as you said, is that we're all just members of groups. That you're a woman, therefore this, or you're white, therefore this, or that person is black, or that person is Hispanic, or they're LGBTQ or whatever. And that's the identitarian aspect of the other party. And that's what conservatives reject. Conservatives are interested in people as people, individuals, and individual rights, and how individuals treat each other. So I said I didn't want to call that a conservative or a Republican Democrat. It's certainly historically that probably is a Republican versus Democrat. But one of the risks of the Trump era is the identitarianism starts to creep into the sort of the MAGA movement. I mean, we've started to see this with, well, these are blue collar voters, therefore they should support Trump, or these people are union members, therefore they should support Trump, or men should support Trump because men are, have this interest, and or whites. The worst one is the whiteness. The whites should support Trump because they are coming over here and changing our culture, and we need to preserve our white American heritage and our culture. That is how, and we do see that from, the Nick Fuentes type and the people on the right. That you see that sort of MAGA sort of creeping in the identitarianism, because that's just, that's an easier way to talk. That's these racial categories and in fights between racial groups is that is how all sorts of political parties and political movements and over time have boiled things down to try to get people riled up, and that's not how we talk. So we really need to guard ourselves against the identitarianism. But this ruling in the Supreme Court, fortunately, is firmly in the ground of treating individuals as individuals and focusing on their individual behavior rather than just assuming that they're members of group, therefore they get certain benefits or detriments.
I appreciate the clarification too, and I concur. I think I probably, rather than saying political parties, it's more conservative versus non-conservative, and I mean I think it's a mentality, it's a mindset. I think with you know what, you just said it. I think it's on both sides, likely, but I would really like to believe that the party in which I most closely identify is the party that believes in individual freedoms and individual beliefs, and I don't know how else to say it other than to think for yourselves, and I think that is so much more common on the conservative side than not.
Yeah, and I do agree. I don't want to overstate the problem on the right. I think the left has a serious, very serious infection with identitarianism, and it's been going on for decades and decades. And they are more prone to be socialist. I mean, we have openly socialist people running for governor in Wisconsin. There is, mayor of New York City may or may not identify as a communist. These ideas of communism and socialism are group identitarian ideas of the workers and the capitalists battling each other, or the racial groups battling each other. That's just more inherent in the Democrat Party. That's the progressive sort of movement. Clarence Thomas gave a great speech a few weeks ago where he talked about where progressivism came from and what havoc it has wreaked in the United States. And conservatives are definitely more individualist. But as I said, there's a portion of the conservative movement, and I don't want to overstate how big it is. I think it is still very fringe, and I think most Republicans don't want to embrace that. But especially among our young men, in particular, there is this risk of sort of overt racism or anti-Semitism that you would much more likely see in an identitarian camp.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. Sometimes the far left and the far right aren't too far away from one another. One of the assessments, and then I want to jump to another quick topic before we run out of time. One of the assessments I read is that and I don't know if you'd call it a criticism or if it's just reality. Is this person writes, this is one of the most consequential voting rights rulings in years, this recent ruling today. It raises the legal threshold for proving racial gerrymandering, likely leading to more aggressive partisan map drawing and fewer successful federal challenges going forward. Do you agree with that?
Um, well, I would say it definitely raises the bar for claims that that there's racial discrimination going on, but it raises the bar for the other side. So the Democrats are the ones that will come into the southern states and say, well, there should be more black districts because there's more black people. That case used to be just proceed. That case would just go to court and they would decide on that. Should there be more black districts or not? Now the standard is, do you have proof of race discrimination? And that actually will benefit the Republicans in their redistricting efforts, because I saw analysis that says that perhaps up to 200 seats in Congress are districts that were drawn in which the states that drew them said they were using race as a factor to draw them.
Wow.
So if you use race as a factor to draw your district, then you have opened yourself up to a challenge from the other side, from the constitutional side, not from the Voting Rights Act side. The Voting Rights Act side, again, is basically like blacks should have a proportional amount representation. That's sort of the idea of the Voting Rights Act. The constitutional side says race can't ever be used. Race can never be used when you're drawing lines. And if there's 200 districts out there where race has been used, it's open season for any voter who lives in those districts to bring a lawsuit and say, you drew my district considering race. That's a no-no. This has got to be redrawn. And that could really change a lot. So in some ways it's raised the bar for certain types of claims, but in other ways it's lowered the bar for attacks that race should never be used. And so I think it's, there is a constitutional principle called the Purcell principle that says that when you get too close to an election, the Supreme Court's not going to allow you to change your districts. And so we're probably in that bubble right now. So I doubt that the Supreme Court is going to allow too many more redistricting efforts between now and November. But certainly for 2028, these lines are all going to be redrawn. And I think the Supreme Court's going to allow it.
All right. So you are so brilliant that you answered the question I was going to ask without me having to ask it. However, in your opinion, does this bode well for, well, you just said it. See, it's not going to bode well for 2026 because it's expected. And I mean, you can look at poly markets or whatever, and we are expected, the Republicans are expected to lose the House, and there are even some that project that we're going to lose or Republicans are going to lose the Senate as well. Do you think that? I mean, because after hearing what you have said, 200 districts, I started to think to myself, are we even going to have an election? I mean, is it going to be contested? The entire election results, will they be contested in November? I mean, is that a possibility?
I think the question is just going to be whether there are more redistricting attempts between now and November, and if there are attempts, like Florida has talked about redistricting, Alabama's talking about it. If they just try to rush through new districts, the question is just going to be whether the Supreme Court allows those to go into effect for this 2026 November election, or are they going to say it's too close to the election, therefore you have to wait till the next 2028. And I think it's probably more likely than not that most of these redistricting efforts won't take effect until the next election and not the 26th election. I mean, what they did in Virginia, that could be the deciding factor of whether that Virginia redistricting.
Well, and I don't think we should ever sit back and breathe a sigh of relief because it's going to benefit Republicans, because there's always another trick up the sleeves of those on the left, that's for sure. Hey, before we run out of time, new lawsuit filed by Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty. What are the details? Gosh, I don't know how I feel about this, because I'm not a fan of people from out of state, particularly if you're talking about Illinois or Minnesota, interfering in a way, interfering in our elections. I mean, do you get that argument, or is it because it's against? Well, and I probably shouldn't respond to you, but I guess I will because I have an opinion. I at least I'm consistent, and I would love to get out of state money out of our elections in Wisconsin. I mean, it would have to be across the board, and I don't know how that's ever going to happen. I would like to. I mean, I have. Maybe it's because I've become more territorial the farther north I live, but I would prefer that only those that live and play, well, not even play because out of state people come to Wisconsin for playing, but live, pay taxes, work, raise their families in this state should have those privileges, I guess, to whatever it is, gather signatures, donate to election. And I mean, it's a conversation that I think we could go on for a long time about, but it'll be interesting to see how those who represent, and I don't know if it's you filed the lawsuit against the Wisconsin Election Commission. Okay. It'll be interesting to see how they respond and really I don't know if the media ever demands any accountability from Tony Evers if he's asked for a comment, how he'll respond to it or how his administration will respond to it. It's a good it's a very fair and good point, Dan, because in that situation or in that election or in that race, wow, yeah, I do see and I guess who knows? And I mean that's what gives us job security, right? There'll always be something to oppose or be in favor of or argue about or who knows, speculate about. But Dan Lennington, I don't want to take up any more of your valuable time. I hope we can make this a more regular gig. It certainly has been great to chat with you, catch up with you. Thank you so much for joining me today. I'll be back. Thanks.